Welcome back to Bible 365 with me, Kathy Carter. I am hosting, I am reading, I am sharing my thoughts with you about the Bible chronologically. Really, what I'm doing is I'm sharing my thoughts with you about God. And I hope you are reading along with me. You know, my goal is to have you guys read. The whole purpose is for you to be reading, you to be understanding God, you to be getting closer in your relationship with God. And then we're just kind of sharing our thoughts with each other. This is really just encouragement for you to keep going, for me to keep going, and for us to keep learning more about God together. Today is day 124. It is May 5th on your calendar. I am using the One Year Chronological Bible reading plan, which you can find online at oneyearbibleonline.com, which I've said wrong for about 120, maybe 2 days. So you can find it online there, and then you would just kind of find the chronological version, download a printable, and read along with me. First Chronicles 23 through 25. We are still in the life of King David, but we are definitely coming to a close in the life of King David. King David is the king of Israel. All 12 tribes have come together under King David. He's sort of near the end of his kingdom, his reign at this point. He is handing over the reins to his son Solomon. Solomon is his son through Bathsheba. So if you guys remember the story really quickly, the story of Bathsheba is where he saw her while she was bathing, brought her to his house, had sex with her. She was married. He knew she was married. He wound up killing her husband in the line of duty at war with the Philistines, and then he took her as his wife. Their first son died, and then Solomon was born after that, along with some other kids after that. So Solomon is the one that the kingdom is going to be passed down to. So we're just going to go this. There's a lot of names in here today, and I'm not going to go over a whole lot of that, but we're just going to get started in First Chronicles 23, 1 through 6. So verse 1, it says, when David was old and full of years, he made his son Solomon king over Israel. So that's how we know who's going to be the next king. The current king has decided that it's going to be Solomon. Gathers together all the leaders of Israel, as well as the priests and the Levites, and then he counts them. So in this sense, what this section is doing is it's putting the kingdom in order, which he's done a few times. But this is the time where he's doing it. As a matter of fact, to even say that, if you have been with me from the very beginning, you can see kind of all through history that this is what God's people do. God's people group does. They set up in an area, they take a census, they figure out all of who's there, and then they prioritize and they order everyone where they're supposed to be. So then we have an understanding, and it's written down in a chronicle, right? So somebody wrote this chronicle to understand who's in charge, what they're all supposed to be doing, right? And then we have the bloodlines, because this really is carried down all through time, all through Israel. So we have the bloodlines of who's supposed to be doing what. So this is what David does. He's putting his house in order. He's figuring out what's happening. And so the first thing he does is he says, Solomon's going to be the new king. Now the Levites, which the Levites are essentially the priests, the one who are in charge of everything in the temple. The priests, the leaders of Israel, and the Levites. So they're slightly different. We'll see what that means. Anyone 30 years old or more are counted, and then there were 38,000 of them. 24,000 are in charge of the work of the temple. 6,000 are officials and judges. So again, we're in this nation, church and state are completely combined. So everything that is done, the way that they're judged, are judged by what God says, right? The king is following God, right? So every single thing in the territory of Israel is all combined under the heading of God. That plane over there. All right, 4,000 of them are gatekeepers, so a very practical job keeping the gates. And then 4,000. I feel like I won't be loud enough over top of the plane. And then 4,000 of them were to praise the Lord with musical instruments. And then David separates them in divisions. So we come back to remembering the Levites. So the Levites, brief history, if you guys either weren't with me or you forget, the Levites were one of 12 sons of Jacob. Jacob was all the way back in the book of Genesis. He was the son of Isaac. who was the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of the Hebrew people. And so Levi was one of the sons. After came out of Egypt, these sons, these Levites, took the place of all first sons of Israel. And so they were all consecrated to the Lord. And so they take care of the temple and all of those things. Levi's three sons were Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. We've heard these names probably at this point in upwards of like 10 to 15 times. So we've heard these names over and over again. And so we hear that they're in charge of things. So the Gershonites, these aren't really anything in particular. I want to move down to the sons of Kohath. The sons of Amram are Aaron and Moses. Aaron and Moses were the ones who, well, Aaron and Moses, I was going to say mostly Moses, but I'm going to take that away. Aaron and Moses were the ones through God who pulled all of the sons of Israel out of Egypt, right? They were in slavery in Egypt, brought them all the way out. They wandered the desert for 40 years because the people were not doing so great. And then they moved towards the land of Israel, which is the land of Canaan, the land of milk and honey. And then Moses died, and then Joshua brought them in. Moses and Aaron both died, and then Joshua brought them into the land of Israel. So we just have an understanding who those two were. Aaron was set apart. So Aaron became the first high priest, and then it was declared that his sons, therefore, all through eternity ever after that, would be the high priests in the temple of the Lord. 2 out of 4 of those sons died. And so I'm just going to give you a quick heads up. If you weren't with me, or even if you were and you just kind of need a little bit of a refresher, 2 of the sons that died it was in Leviticus 10:1. And if you want to go over the lesson that I did, it was day 50 on February 19th. So day 50 was when I talked about what happened to those 2 sons, why those 2 sons died, and why that matters. So those 2 sons died, but 2 sons lived, and they have descendants hereafter. So we have a lot of descendants from them. Gershom and Eleazar were Moses' sons, and they became part of the tribes of the Levites. All right, so I want to move on from here into the Merarites. The Merarites they have a bunch of sons there. These descendants in verse 24, these were the descendants of Levi by their families. The heads of their families were registered under their names and counted individually. That is, the workers 20 years old or more who served in the temple of the Lord, because David was like, listen, since the Lord, the God of Israel, has granted rest to his people. So now that this was another sort of different time in their kingdom, now that the tabernacle is no longer moving. So when the people moved in the wilderness for 40 years, the tabernacle, the house of God, moved with them. And so the Levites were in charge of moving all of those pieces. So Aaron and all of his descendants went in and spoke to God. And then the rest of them all kind of picked up and moved all the pieces of the tabernacle. Now they're going to build a bigger, better, permanent tabernacle. And since they're building this, God is no longer moving. Since God is no longer moving, the Levites don't need to move anymore. So now they have new jobs in the kingdom. And again, this is something that we've seen not that long ago. David did some of this not that long ago. So it says, for David said, since the Lord, the God of Israel, has granted rest to his people and has come to dwell in Jerusalem forever, the Levites no longer need to carry the tabernacle or any of the articles used in its service. Then it says the duty in verse 28, the duty of the Levites was to help Aaron's descendants in the service of the temple of the Lord. So here's what they would do. They were in charge of the courtyards, the side rooms, the purification of all sacred things, and the performance of all other duties. They were also in charge of setting out the bread. So if you remember, the bread was set out on the altar. They were in charge of setting it out. They were in charge of making it. And it said also they were to stand every evening and to thank the Lord. But one of the things they did with the bread was to do all the measurements, the quantity, the size, and everything like that. And this just, again, if we're talking pictures, right? And if we're talking about an understanding of God, and this is why, going back to the beginning, I feel like for me, it's just amazing, because what they're doing looks very much like how God dropped manna to them when they walked in the wilderness, right? So this is generations and generations later, hundreds of years later, because after Moses and Aaron, there was Joshua, which was a few, probably like 20 to 40 years. And then after that was the time of Judges, which was several hundred years. And then we have Saul, and now we have David. So we have a long span of time. And it looks as if the Levites are essentially providing this manna in the house of the Lord, right? So they're giving bread like the Lord gave bread. They're preparing it, they're mixing it, they're putting it up on the altar. So it's just these visuals, right? Like in some ways God has changed, but in many, many ways he hasn't. And it's just a matter of us being able to see that, right? So when anyone says, oh, this God is different, or Jesus is different than God, or the God back then did different, right? Like you can see his fingerprints on everything, right? Like he's got fingerprints on time when we talk about days, 3 days, 7 days, right? He has fingerprints on time. He has fingerprints when we keep talking about the stone, right? There's something about a stone and that being God and the presence and the power of stones, right? And how that leaves its fingerprint all over the Bible. And like I said, in this, we see that the bread that the Lord is given, right, is coming from now the Levites, who are that connection between the people, the Israelite people, and the Lord, right? They're the consecrated first sons to God. And so there's that, there again, that bridge between. So we see that they provide the bread, right? So just looking for this imagery that we see of who God is and then how God is connected. And so when you start to wonder if he makes sense, or if any of it, or if this is just a bunch of random books that are put together, reading through all of it, hopefully will show you a different picture. All right. So moving on. So anyway, they're providing the bread, right? So this set of Levites is providing the bread. They're in charge of those offerings. And then I want to move down to 1 Chronicles 24, going into verse 1. These were the divisions of the descendants of Aaron. So this is where we get into a lot of names. So the descendants of Aaron are the high priests. Sorry, it's a little windy out here, and so I keep messing with my hair. So these are the divisions of the priests. So we start with these three. Oh, I moved, sorry. The divisions of the descendants of Aaron. They were Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. Remember that Nadab and Abihu died, so we don't have any descendants from them. So we just have descendants from the other two. So it's Ahimelech is a descendant, Zadok is a descendant of Eleazar, and Ahimelech is a descendant of Ithamar, which we have heard their names through David sort of time and time again over the past few chapters. And then David separates them into divisions for their order of ministering. So we're going to see this again throughout the next couple of chapters. So this is the way that they go in and minister to the Lord. No one gets special privilege. Nobody gets put above anybody else, right? One clan isn't better than another clan. They divide this up because the house of Eleazar, the house of Eleazar, is about twice the size of the clan of the house of Ithamar. And so they get 16 lots, and Ithamar gets 8 lots. But again, it's not about putting anyone first. It's just about the numbers. It's a numbers game. And so it comes down, and it's a total of 24 lots. And so each person draws a lot, and so they know when they're going to go in and be ministering, right? So that's it. It's just a matter of order. So in 19, it says, this was their appointed order of ministering when they entered the temple of the Lord, according to the regulations prescribed for them by their ancestor Aaron, as the Lord, the God of Israel, had commanded them. So then moving on, it says, as for the rest of the descendants of Levi, and then they just start listing some of the descendants of Levi, some of the Levites according to their families. So we see some of the families of the Levites. Again, we're going back to Merari. So some of this is just a repeat of what we've had already. Going into verse 30, these were the Levites according to their families. They also cast lots. So these are not the ones that are going into the high priest. These are some of the other ones. They also cast lots, just as their relatives, the descendants of Aaron, did, in the presence of King David and Zadok, Ahimelech, and the heads of families. So we're just establishing order. That's it, right? I don't want to make it too confusing, which I feel like now I'm making it too confusing. Just establishing order. This is how you go in line. This is the day that you go, right? The person after you is this person. It's always this person, right? It's always this clan that's after you, and then that clan's after them, and then that clan's after them, right? And it just cycles back and forth all over again. They're just establishing order. That's it. So then in verse 1 of 1 Chronicles 25, it says, David, together with the commanders of the army, set apart some of the sons of Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun for the ministry of prophesying, accompanied by harps, lyres, and cymbals. This is something that we've already seen. And the only thing I really want to delve into is the idea of prophesying. It seems to be a word here that feels like it's interchangeable in a couple of different things. And so it looks like all of these are Kohathites, and all of them are prophesying, but looks like they're all prophesying in slightly different ways, which of course then makes one wonder what's the actual definition of prophesying. And I think I'm going to say it's all of these things, right? So it's not maybe just like, I think we would assume prophesy means, and I guess I've heard a few of these things before. So prophesying means a telling of the future, right? I'm going to prophesy what's going to happen in the future. It doesn't seem to be necessarily what it means in here. So I want to go over what it means in here. It may change later, but I want to go over what it means in here. We've also seen Saul was prophesying. If you guys remember, he was with a whole bunch of people that were prophesying, and they were playing tambourines and lyres and cymbals and all these kind of things. And so musically, he was prophesying with people. So it says from the sons of Asaph, and it lists those sons, they prophesied under the king's supervision. As for Jeduthun, they prophesied using the harp in thanking and praising the Lord. So one of it is supervised prophesying. Another one is, it looks like, musically prophesying, right? So we're going with harp. They're thanking and praising the Lord. So they're doing, maybe these sons are prophesying with praise and thanksgiving. The other ones might be prophesying, it's not really specific, but maybe they're prophesying things about the king, right? Because they're under the king's supervision. And then as for Heman, his sons, it said all these sons of Heman were the king's seers. So they were given him through the promises of God to exalt him. God gave Heman 14 sons and 3 daughters. So I think that they were given to David to exalt David. So their prophesying was to exalt David, right? To encourage, to lift him up, right? So again, I'm going to say that there are some different forms of prophesying and what that means. I'm going to always say that they're the word of the Lord, right? These are Levites. These are men that are in the house of the Lord. And so they're speaking from the Lord, but maybe in a couple of different ways. Some just by playing music, some by exalting, some by actually prophesying and seeing what comes in the future. So it seems like there's just different ways. And just to, again, to keep an eye on some of those things, to keep that in mind of what that really means. So in verse 6, it says, all these men were under the supervision of their fathers for the music of the temple of the Lord. And then Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman. So everyone who prophesied, they were all under the supervision of their fathers. Their fathers were the leaders. And then those 3 fathers were under the supervision of the king. So here we go again. We're creating order out of chaos. David is in charge, the king, David at this time, Solomon after that. And then those 3 brothers, and then underneath were all the sons. And I'm going to make an assumption that this is the way it's going to continue to be, right? It's supposed to continue to be for a while until there's a change. All right. And now we move on to, really, this is just, so there's 288 of them, young and old alike, teachers as well as students, and they cast lots for their duties. So here we go again. This is just how we're finishing up the chapter. Is an entire list of 24 families, 288 people, 24 families. Each one of them cast their lots to get their very particular duty. So they all know what they're doing. It's them and their sons and their relatives. So you are born into your job in the house of Levi. That may be in some of the other tribes as well. I know there's some similarities in other tribes, but I know very specifically in the tribe of Levi, you're born into your position, you're born into your job, and then this is what you do. And then whoever you have as children, then they're born into that same position. So if you play the harp, your sons play the harp, their sons play the harp, your brother and those kids, right? So moving on down the line, that they all follow in that same position. Maybe some comfort there, maybe some frustration there. If it's something that they maybe aren't good at doing. So who knows? Or maybe they don't find joy in that. So, but that's how God set it up. This is now, at this point, this is God's plan, and this is how he plans to move forward in the kingdom of Solomon. So we're going to see what happens tomorrow in the kingdom, seeing what David has to say, and moving on from here. So if you guys like this, if this was a blessing, I want you to hit the like button. I want you to share it with people. I want you to subscribe to the channel so it can keep coming up to you. And I really, as always, I want you to keep reading, be in your Bible first, listen second, comment third, because I'd love to hear from you guys. Keep reading. I will see you tomorrow.